Bill Goldberg has been hit with a heavy sentence. If you've been following closely, you already know this wasn't random. Some of his own peers have even called him one of the most intense and, at times, most dangerous guys in the business.
Goldberg, to me, was one of the most unprofessional wrestlers there ever was in the business. He hurt everybody he worked with.
So, what is this sentence everyone keeps talking about? It all traces back to December 19th, 1999. By that point, Bill Goldberg was already one of WCW's most dominant stars. Since bursting onto the scene in 1997, he had built a legendary undefeated streak, over 170 wins, and turned himself into a massive draw. His style wasn't about technical finesse, it was about power, speed, and destruction. Matches were short, explosive, and brutal, but while Goldberg was thriving, WCW behind the scenes was beginning to crack. Politics, power struggles, and creative control, especially involving Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff, were shaping who got pushed and who didn't. Standing across from Goldberg that night was Bret Hart, the reigning WCW World Heavyweight Champion. Hart had joined WCW in 1997 after the Montreal Screwjob and spent years trying to find his place. Now, he was finally on top, and this match at Starrcade 1999 was positioned as a defining moment. The contrast between the two couldn't have been sharper. Goldberg was raw, explosive, and relatively inexperienced. Hart was a seasoned technician, known for precision and ring awareness. The match was set. No disqualification. WCW World Heavyweight Championship on the line. A collision months in the making. But before they walked out to the ring, Bret Hart pulled Goldberg aside in the locker room. He had one request.
I said, Bill, whatever you do, don't hurt me. So we went in and had the match.
That was it, one line. Bret Hart would later say he had seen enough of Bill Goldberg in the ring to understand what he was dealing with, a powerful, intense performer who, by the standards of wrestling's craft, was still green. He had given similar warnings before, but he didn't expect what came next. The match began, and early on, Goldberg caught Hart with an elbow in the corner, then another. Hart later described the shots as feeling like being hit with a brick wrapped in a pillowcase. He saw stars. He staggered. But he kept going. A short time later, Hart went for a spot he had executed hundreds of times, the figure four around the ring post. The setup was simple. Hart drops to the floor, brings his leg up to the apron, the opponent grabs it to control the motion, and Hart lowers himself into the hold. This time, something went wrong. Goldberg grabbed Hart's foot, then let go. Hart's head snapped back and hit the floor. By that point, he had already taken 2 hard shots to the head. Still, he got up. He got back in the ring, and then came the mule kick.
Threw me in the ropes and kicked me with every ounce of strength he had in his whole body, with every full extension.
In professional wrestling, a kick like this is supposed to be controlled, pulled at the last second, with the leg bent and the contact landing on the torso, not the skull. The impact is meant to look devastating without actually being dangerous. What Bill Goldberg threw had none of that control.
I turned and he kicked me so hard here in the back of my head, right in the back of my brain, tore this muscle in half, which will never go back.
Bret Hart went down and he blacked out.
Went down, I held my neck, and I saw a million stars. That was the injury.
He couldn't recall the rest of the match from memory, only from watching it back later. Bret Hart still finished the bout, retaining the WCW World Heavyweight Championship in a controversial ending involving Roddy Piper. He walked back through the curtain, but what met him on the other side was nothing.
There's no doctor. I had a trainer come up and hand me a couple of Advils. No one helped me to my car.
Bret Hart staggered through the hotel lobby, made it to his room, and passed out, still fully dressed. The very next night, he was back in a WCW ring. He told himself it was just a sore neck. Over the following weeks, he wrestled at least 7 more matches. He even faced Bill Goldberg again in a rematch. He took a choke slam from Sid Vicious. He absorbed a powerbomb from Kevin Nash. He took chair shots. Every impact landed on a head that had already been compromised. Hart later described seeing silver dots, like flashes of solder, during the powerbomb from Sid. On some level, he knew something was wrong, but he kept going. That was the culture in WCW at the time. You worked through it. His final match came in Buffalo, New York, in early January 2000 against Kevin Nash. After that, Hart flew home to Calgary, and during all of it, he reached out once to Goldberg, who had injured his own arm after punching through a limousine window around the same time.
I remember I called Bill, and as messed up as I was at home with my concussion.
He made the call from his house, barely able to function. Bret Hart was forgetting basic things. He couldn't even remember Christmas or New Year's that year.
Never ever did get a call back.
For his part, Bill Goldberg acknowledged the kick and its consequences from early on. He maintained it was a mistake, never intentional, and expressed deep regret. His statement, "If I had meant to hurt him, he would never have gotten up," was meant to draw a line between accident and malice. But Bret Hart heard something very different. That gap in interpretation between intent and impact ended up defining the next 25 years. When Hart finally saw a specialist in Calgary in January 2000, the diagnosis was blunt. He showed signs of serious concussion, slurred speech, cognitive issues, and severe damage at the base of his skull. Despite that, he had continued wrestling for weeks, taking more hits on an already injured head. Doctors told him his career was likely over. On January 16, 2000, Hart vacated the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. There was no farewell match, no send-off, just an abrupt end in a hotel room while still dealing with the aftermath of that one kick. What followed made things worse. WCW gradually cut his pay, relying on an insurance policy through Lloyd's of London, which led to a long legal battle. Hart later estimated the total loss, missed matches, future earnings, and major appearances, at around $16 million. In 2002, he suffered a stroke, which he linked to the accumulated trauma. Recovery was long, and any chance of an in-ring return disappeared completely. Meanwhile, Goldberg's in-ring reputation continued to spark debate. His style, built on intensity and realism, was seen by some peers as unsafe. Incidents involving names like William Regal and Chris Jericho added to that perception. Over time, the Starrcade kick stopped being viewed as an isolated moment and became part of a larger conversation about risk, experience, and responsibility in the ring. Goldberg's response evolved. Early on, he openly called it the biggest mistake of his career and expressed lasting remorse. But years later, that tone shifted. He stood by the idea that it was an accident, not an act of malice, and suggested that repeated criticism had gone too far. Hart, on the other hand, has remained consistent in his account, returning to the same details in interviews for decades. So, was Goldberg ever truly sentenced? Not in any official sense. There was no legal punishment, no formal ruling. But in another way, the story itself became the judgment. Every retelling of Starrcade 1999 keeps that moment alive, permanently linking both men to what happened that night. In the end, the divide remains. Hart sees a career ended by a preventable mistake. Goldberg sees a tragic accident that he has already answered for. And somewhere between those two perspectives lies the version of the story that continues to define both of their legacies.